So thank you very much, everyone, for coming to our summer innovative discovery series. Before introducing our speaker today, let me give you some housekeeping information. Please make sure you sign in and please RSVP so we can better prepare for the next session. The next talk will be Faculty Mentoring in Challenging Times by Dr. Shimowitz on July 29th. And then we have a week of, oh no, that was older. And then the Delaware Medical Legal Partnership, attorneys collaborating with clinical teams to address social determinants of health by our own Susan Howard-Smola on August 12th. And you can see the full schedule on the ACCEL website, and all the previous presentations are available on our website, DE-CTR.org. So it's really an honor, and we are delighted today to have Dr. Shilsom with us as our speaker. Dr. Shilsom is Associate Psychiatrist in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health Sciences at Johns Hopkins. She's also Associate Director of the Paul McHugh Program for Human Flourishing, Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, also at Johns Hopkins, and Associate Faculty for Mental Health and Addiction Policy Research, and also Vice Chair for Education, Psychiatry and Behavioral Science, all in Johns Hopkins. Dr. Shilsom got her MD from University of Maryland, and her residency in psychiatry again at Johns Hopkins, and a fellowship in forensic psychiatry at University of Maryland. She has a very large number of peer-reviewed publications, review articles, editorials, book chapters, and 2 textbooks. I'm very impressed. She wrote some very, very interesting reports, such as the use of Twitter to advance perinatal mental health addiction care and research, which was published in the Archives of Women's Mental Health, or studying anonymous health issues and substance use on college campuses with DE-CTR, which was a workshop presentation at the World Wide Web and Population Health Intelligence Conference. She is a PI or has been a PI or co-PI on multiple R01s, mostly from NIDA, and also has taught multiple courses, directed multiple workshops and seminars, many of them on social media use for education. She has a very long experience in mentoring medical students, psychiatry residents, and fellows, has multiple honors and teaching awards excellence. And one of them that I noticed, she was named one of the 100 healthcare and digital health influencers to follow in 2014. So I'm really impressed, and I'm really honored to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. Can everybody hear me? I'm a low talker, so let me raise your hands if I start drifting. So I do have a disclosure. I'm going to be talking about journal impact factors and alternative metrics, and I am a joint editor-in-chief, for which I do get some compensation for the International Review of Psychiatry. I don't get financial compensation, but I'm also on the Associate Professor's Promotions Committee at Hopkins, so that will inform some of the talk as well. So the objectives here are pretty straightforward. I'm going to be giving some background on traditional journal-based metrics, and so hopefully you'll see us identify one limitation of those. I'm going to define the term Altmetrics, which is pretty straightforward, and then we're going to talk about the strengths and limitations of Altmetrics. So I used to give a lot of talks on social media to academic audiences, and a lot of people got it, some people didn't. I would say the majority of people had this reaction. And so I thought that in order to reach a broader audience, and not just people that were early adopters and innovators, that I needed to stop giving talks on what social media are and how to use them, and rather talk about the why. So I hope that I'll make some kind of case for why social media may be helpful to you as an academic in your clinical public health research or education research, and really talk about what's in it for you. So ultimately, I hope that the why for all of us is about having an impact on public health and individual health. I see medicine as a public trust, to always be striving to make it a better public trust. On the other hand, clinical and public health researchers and educators deserve and often desire academic advancement, just like their basic science peers. And for public health, clinical health researchers, the impact of research can really be amplified when you use evidence that's drawn from multiple sources. So again, I'm going to focus on why, and why social media will not only increase the dissemination and impact of your research, but it will also enhance your recognition as an academic leader. And if you've got an academic appointment, it will help you get promoted. So from what I understand about the faculty, that you have faculty appointments at Thomas Jefferson or your promotions based on the Thomas Jefferson system. And I looked at their handbook, and they have 4 tracks. They're non-tenure track positions for full-time employees elsewhere. And unlike a lot of other medical universities or research universities, scholarship's not necessary for promotion on all of these tracks. However, for most tracks, for tenure track faculty and at other research universities, assessment of promotion is for promotion is typically focused on the faculty member's ability to produce and promulgate knowledge. I've operationalized that as counting the evidence, weighing the count, direct appraisal from others, and then honorifics, ways in which your achievements might be acknowledged by others. So for people who are doing non-basic science research, it's especially critical, as I said, that this evidence of achievement comes from as many sources as possible. So I'm going to focus first on traditional scholarship. Again, I think most places scholarship still rests primarily on peer-reviewed publications and the impact of those publications, which are measured by journal-based metrics, such as the impact factor of the journal in which your article is published, the number of times your article is cited, and the impact factor of the journal publishing the article that cites your article. So Garfield first described the journal impact factor. Anybody want to take a guess of the year that the journal impact factor debuted? Decade, maybe?
The 70s?
70s, yeah, 1972. So he wrote an article in Science describing this. And I won't go into the reasons behind his desire to have this, but basically the journal impact factor, or I'll call it JIF sometimes, quantifies the influence of a journal by calculating a ratio. So in the numerator, it's the number of citations during the current year of articles that were published in the previous 2 years. And the denominator is the number of quote-unquote citable articles published in the previous 2 years. So the idea, of course, is that you want the biggest numerator and the smallest denominator possible. I'm going to talk more about the intricacies of this. And there's much anticipation by journal editors every year of what, and publishers of what the JIF calculation is for the journal. That rests, the JIF calculation rests in the hands now of a private company, Thomson Reuters. So the JIF has several limitations. One is that it's slow. Citations can take years to accumulate. You do a clinical trial, you publish on it, somebody wants to replicate that, they do the trial, they get the results, they write up the paper. It can be years that your original paper will be cited. It's narrow. It's really only measuring one type of impact. That's citations by other scholars during a brief period. It's interestingly non-transparent and irreproducible. So Thomson doesn't reveal its methods. And when editors request, a couple of editors have published on this, request to review the data used to calculate the JIF, they can't reproduce the number published by Thomson. Another limitation is gaming. So publishers, this is very interesting, I think, can negotiate directly with Thomson to adjust the classification of what exactly is a citable, quote unquote, article for a particular journal. And that, of course, then decreases the number of articles considered citable, yet they are still cited. So So you can manipulate that. The other way you can manipulate that is editorial decisions can be made to increase the number of non-citable articles. Again, they're still able to be cited, but they're classified as non-citable. And you'll see that a lot of people, you can see this now in the kinds of articles published by journals that they're doing this. They're including articles with no abstracts. That puts it into the non-citable category, or the non-citable category. Commentaries, letters to the editor, sometimes specialty columns like media columns, things like that, will be non-citable. Other gating, of course, occurs in the peer review process. As I'm sure many of you have experienced, where editorial and reviewers pressure you to cite other articles from their journal. And finally, these journal-based metrics don't measure the level of impact at the article level. So on this last point, I'll just linger a bit. In 2008, the editor-in-chief of Nature published an examination of Nature papers that were cited in 2004. So they were published in 2002 and 2003, and found that 89% of Nature's impact factor that year, 2004, was generated by about 25% of the papers. And so this has become sort of a commonly accepted rule, the 80-20 rule, that 80% of a journal's impact factor comes from 20% of the papers. This slide sums up the problem in another way. So the GIF of any given journal really tells you little about any given article in that journal. So a natural experiment occurs from time to time when a paper is purposely simultaneously published in multiple journals. So this can be done when it's a white paper or some kind of major paper. The consortium of editors get together and they say, we're all going to publish this paper simultaneously. This is one example of a paper called Clinical Trial Registration, looking back and moving ahead, that was published simultaneously in several journals. And a blogger, Stuart Cantrill, looked at the citations the paper had received in a range of journals and their impact factors of those journals. And so this is a slide from his blog, and he gives talks on this as well, that illustrates that there's a pretty good correlation between the number of citations from this identical paper received in each journal with the impact factors of those journals. So it can be a little misleading to assume that the impact factor of a journal really reflects how good any particular paper in that journal is. There's some arbitrariness about it. Obviously, there's different, we perceive different standards for publication in some of these journals, but this is the same article depending on which journal it was cited a different number of times. And there's also the problem of highly cited papers that are later retracted. And there's the Wakefield's Lancet paper that suggested a link between childhood vaccines and autism that was cited many times before it was retracted. And then there's also the equally concerning problem of retracted papers that actually become more cited, more highly cited after their retraction. So this paper from 2007 was cited 247 times before retraction, 776 times after retraction. I'm going to move from the journal impact factor to talking about HIndex. So the striking thing to me, at Hopkins anyway, a lot of people, the sort of first question people ask when they're thinking about going up for promotion, or you're thinking about going up for promotion, is people will ask, what is your HIndex? So HIndex was developed in, here's another question, what year?
The 80s.
2005, the time of YouTube.
I'm 1 for 2.
Literally, it's only a little over 10 years old, but it has now become ubiquitous in academia. H stands for Hirsch. That's the guy that developed it. So it combines an author's productivity, the number of articles, and the impact of those articles measured by the number of citations. It's derived from this mathematical formula. So if you look it up on Wikipedia, which I did, this is the definition, that an author with an index of H has published H papers, each of which has been cited in other papers at least H times. That didn't really help me. So I spent like an hour are kind of studying this, these examples. So it's actually so simple. You know, you look at, first you take your papers, or any author's papers, and you order them by the number of citations for each paper. So you rank order from the most citations to the least citations. And then you look for the last position in which the number of citations of a paper is greater than or equal to the position of that paper. And that position is actually what's called H. So if an author has 5 publications, this is an example, with 10 citations for the most cited paper, 8 for the next, 5, 4, 3 citations, the H-index is equal to 4 because the 4th publication has 4 citations and the 5th has only 3. That's it. Give you another example. Rank order the papers in terms of most citations to least citations. The 5th position paper, the 3rd position paper has 5 citations. 5 is greater than 3, and so that's the H-index.
So it's always the 3rd position paper?
No, it is not. It's always the position at which the number of citations is greater than or equal to the position. So here's an example from Google Scholar. The column on the left is my addition to make it clearer. But Google Scholar, you can order your papers from greatest to least cited. And so the most cited paper by this Dr. Lund, who was a postdoc with Andre Jones. So I knew her, and I knew she was relatively early in her career, so I looked at her citations. The most cited paper was cited 65 times. That's in position 1. And then position 2, 22, 3, 11 citations. Position 4, and these are rank order, 11 citations. Position 5, 8 citations. Position 6, 5 citations. So her H-index is 5. So the position 5, H is the position. So the position 5 is the position at which the number of citations is greater than or equal to the position. You can see the flaws in this system. So some of the limitations are that it's still journal-based, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It's still slow, it's still citation-based, and that takes time, those take time to accrue. It's still subject to gating, particularly author self-citation. It doesn't adjust for co-author numbers, and there's been an explosion in the number of co-authored papers. And the more co-authors on a paper, the more likely it is to be cited. The H-index also poorly recognizes those authors with a small number of articles of very high impact. Not that this happens a lot, but say you've only published 3 papers, and one's been cited 1,000 times, one's been cited 500 times, one's been cited 100 times. Your H-index is still 3, because that's the position, the last position of the rank order of your papers at which the number of citations is greater than or equal to the position. Most importantly, I think, to clinicians, public health researchers, teachers, administrators who may be engaging in scholarship, is that H-indices differ widely among different fields. So the H-indices for clinical researchers, educational researchers, really pale in comparison to basic scientists. And you can only really then compare H-indices among scholars working in the same field. So the most highly cited living biologist, who happens to be a psychiatrist who trained at Hopkins, Saul Snyder, his H-index is 233. Clinical researchers are, I quoted an extreme, but clinical researchers are more likely to have an H-index around 30 or 50. Medical educators, the H-index can be even lower. So this is from a 2014 paper by Doha. It was published in BMC Medical Education. And they looked at the H-indices of 130 editorial board members from the top medical education journals. So those are considered probably the most scholarly medical educators. And they found that the median HIndex for full professors was 14, and for associates and assistants it wasn't statistically different, but 7 and 6.5. So that's why you have to consider what the field is before giving much weight to the HIndex. That's all background. So contrast that with contrasting Altmetrics to journal-based metrics like the JIF and HIndex. So Altmetrics rapidly measure the impact of an individual article or another research product. It could be a podcast, an online course, a video, and the dissemination of those products or articles, in addition to other types of impact. So the advent of electronic publishing of articles before their print release, and online publishing of articles and other academic products in general, like podcasts and videos, coupled with the rise of social media, has really enabled the global dissemination and discussion of academic products online. So Altmetrics provide a way of quantifying the online dissemination and discussion of any academic product. So I'm going to suggest some of the strengths and then I'll describe them in more detail. So Altmetrics address the limitations of a journal impact factor at HIndex. Those limitations of being slow and narrow, because Altmetrics are available nearly instantaneously, and they gather evidence of clinical and public health researchers' achievements from multiple sources. Altmetrics measure dissemination and discussion of a variety of academic products, not just articles, to a diverse group of stakeholders, as opposed to measuring only citation of articles by other academics. And they provide, for articles, quantification at the level of the article or of another academic product itself rather than a journal. So it provides a way, I would suggest, for clinical and public health and education faculty to quickly demonstrate the dissemination and a diversity of impact of their scholarly activities. So to illustrate these strengths, I'm going to focus on one Altmetric system of scoring, the altmetric.com. This is widely adopted in biomedical journals. It's got a lot of traction there. There are other scoring systems that some journals use, but this is the one that's being used by the highest impact journals. So I don't have any stock or anything in Altmetric, but I just use this as an example. Everybody seen this? Anybody seen this? So on websites, on the journal's page, for your article, if they subscribe to the Altmetric scoring system, you'll see this little Altmetric donut. That's what that little symbol to the left is called. You can also see this on the article. There's an Altmetric page for your article as well. So the Altmetric donut is a visual representation of the volume, sources, and authors of an academic product's mentions. So the center of the donut contains the academic product or article's numeric Altmetric score. And I've used these for years, looked at these for years, and didn't know this. The colors of the Altmetric donut each represent various sources of mentions. It's not just sort of arbitrary rainbow. So Altmetrics monitor the following sources for mentions of academic products: public policy documents, mainstream news outlets, online reference managers, post-publication peer review platforms, research highlights, Wikipedia, blogs, other social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and multimedia and other online platforms like YouTube and Reddit. And the amount of color in the donut will change depending on the particular sources.
You might get the run speed Charles ETA 12 minutes. Attention please, attention please. Stroke alert, you might get the run speed Charles ETA 12 minutes.
So the amount of color in the donut will change depending on the particular sources mentioning the article or product. For instance, the product on the left has received a lot of attention from mainstream media, which is represented by the color red. So you can just glance at this if you know their color coding, and you'll be able to tell. The product on the right has received most of its attention from blogs, which are represented by yellow, and public policy documents, which are purple. And then looking at this one on the right, blue is for Twitter. So it's received most of its attention on Twitter and in a post-publication peer review forum, which is light gray. So the numeric altmetric score, the number that's in the center of the donut, is a composite measure of the attention that an article or other academic product has received. And that score is based on three main factors: volume, source, and authors. So the first factor, the volume of mentions, is pretty straightforward. It's the number of sources mentioning a particular product or articles in whatever source it is. So the greater number of sources, the more weight is given to these mentions in the Altmetric score. The second main factor, sources, is a little more complicated. It has three sub-factors. The reach of a source author, the more followers somebody has, if it's posted on news outlet, how many people are looking at that, the promiscuity of a source, how many times a product is mentioned in a short time. The more promiscuous, the less weight, because if it's a big PR blast, or it has just is a flash in the pan, they give that less weight. And the potential bias of a source. The multiple mentions of the same product by the same author, less weight. If I tweet about my article, a zillion times over 3 years, it's not going to be given much weight. And the third main factor, authors, really looks at the stature of, and I use that in quotes, of who's writing about this. So a mainstream news journalist or a blogger or a social media author have different weights. So mentions by mainstream news outlets are given greater weight than by bloggers or random social media authors, reflecting the relative value. Okay, so now that you understand a little bit about how the Altmetric score is calculated and visualized, how do you really know what your article's Altmetric score is? So increasingly, as I said, more and more journals are listing this score directly on the article's page. You may have been to a page and not noticed this, but here's JAMA. There's a donut there on the right. That's the Altmetric score. And from that article's page on the JAMA website, you can click on the Altmetric area here to a variety of pages on the Altmetric site about the article. And at that point, you can find more detailed information. This page shows the volume of mentions over time and general information about the sources of the mentions. Picked up by 3 news outlets, blogged by 5, tweeted by 227, etc. Here's another example. This is from Academic Medicine. This is the Academic Medicine's website. And then you can see on the right the Altmetric Donut. And you can click away and go to the Altmetric website for the article. And you can see the usual volume and source statistics. But you also start getting these geographic demographics, and you can see summary statistics comparing the article to other articles. Like about this score, it says, it's comparing it to other articles scored by Altmetric. So it's pretty clear. I think that Altmetric score is useful to quickly identify the level of online dissemination of a particular article. And thus how Altmetrics can address some of the limitations of the journal impact factor and HIndex, that they're slow and that they quantify the level of the journal or author. So now I want to turn to how Altmetrics are less narrow than journal-based metrics and how they can provide a measure of overall dissemination and actually to a variety of stakeholders, and therefore might be able to capture a diversity of impact that journal-based metrics, which are based on citations by scholars, might miss. And this might be especially relevant if you want to provide evidence of your productivity and your reach to make a public and health impact. So this can be impact on society, impact on medical education, on public engagement. So in terms of impact on society, I'm going to talk about this. I'm also going to weave in how on your CV you might document this. So take this example of a paper about a system innovation. So articles about innovative systems of healthcare delivery, like this one, can have a huge impact on the way healthcare is delivered, and thus on society. But systems innovators aren't often academic scholars. And so an article like this may be very rarely or very slow to accumulate citations. However, Altmetrics allow an immediate demonstration of how it's disseminated and discussed by this diverse group of stakeholders. This article, at the time I pulled it up, had 0 citations. Maybe it has 1 or 2 now. It's published in March 2016. 0 citations, but its impact, its Altmetrics score is 130. It's been viewed almost 2,000 times. It's been picked up by 8 mainstream news outlets. It's been shared on Twitter throughout North America and some in Europe. This is not your CV template necessarily, but just as an example of a CV template, in addition to specifying that an article is a system innovation publication, you can annotate your CV by entering, depends on your institution, but at our institution we can enter in italics under the article's Altmetric score, how it ranks compared to other articles scored by Altmetric. You can also note if it received media attention on your CV. You can note if it's been cited in a public policy document. I think all those things are relevant because they're demonstrating impact on society, which is usually one of the criteria for promotion. For medical educators, you can write articles on innovative teaching techniques that can really make a huge impact on how medical education is delivered and have a big impact on medical education in general. But like health systems innovators, medical educators aren't often academic scholars, and so medical education articles might be rarely or slowly cited in literature, as reflected by the HIndex. So this is an article on flipped classrooms. People know what that is, where the educator actually assigns pre-work for the classroom, and then when people come together, they discuss what was the pre-work was, so that it's instead of giving a lecture, you actually could assign the lecture to be viewed ahead of time, and then face-to-face time between the teacher and the learners would be more discussion. So it's called Flipped Classrooms. Prober and Kahn of Khan Academy published this article in Academic Medicine. Academic Medicine is the highest impact medical education journal. And Kahn also gave a talk, I think around the same year, the year before, year after, at a AAMC meeting, the American Association of Medical Colleges meeting. And so all these deans of medical schools were there, and they went back to their medical schools and said, to their deans of education or vice deans of education, you need to flip the classroom. We need to flip the classroom. So all these medical schools started flipping the classroom, less lecture time, etc. Well, according to PubMed, this article has been cited 11 times. And so I would say that traditional journal-based citation metrics has not captured its impact. However, Altmetrics are able to paint, I think, a more accurate picture of this article's impact. It has a relatively high Altmetric score in the top 5% of all scored articles that were certified. And that's based in part on its global dissemination and discussion on Twitter, as you can see by the heavy blue in the Altmetric Donut. And also down below it says it's been mentioned by 65 tweeters, which really demonstrates rapid and broad dissemination and potential medical education impact of an article. You need more information about what medical schools actually did, but it certainly shows the dissemination. And if you know your article has resulted in medical schools adopting flipped classrooms, for instance, you could annotate your CV and say, after this article was published, curricula changed at XYZ medical schools. Or if your work has sparked a site visit by a colleague, you can annotate your CV to reflect that. I wrote this article and then I had 3 visits from other deans of education. And this is just to remind you that there are many non-traditional types of academic products, especially in education, things like online courses, webinars, videotaped talks, podcasts, which you are able to place in your CV. Most institutions now have a place for other media besides articles. And there's usually built-in metrics for websites that tell you how many times people have gone to your site. And then lastly, what Altmetrics.
Code 44, tower E Edward 4E10. Attention please. Order code 44, tower E Edward 4E10.
I think what Altmetrics do best of all is demonstrate public engagement and outreach. So it can rapidly tell you how well, how widely cited your article or other academic product is disseminated. And this is when you click on that About This Score tab or whatever, you can see all the detail that you could potentially include in your CV. You can see how your article compares to other articles from the journal of the same vintage or both, include those, the number of downloads, the views of your article or other product. Again, I think this is a measure of the public dissemination of your work. So despite all of its strengths, or their strengths, there are also limitations to Altmetrics. It's proprietary. Some of these scores are proprietary, like altmetric.com. Its precise methods of calculation haven't been disclosed. To my knowledge, there's been no attempt to obtain raw data to test its reproducibility. Like the HIndex, it doesn't adjust for co-author number. Like journal-based metrics, there's the possibility of gaming, although weighting methods can sometimes address some of that. And there's content bias, which is really important. So newer products have an inherent advantage over older ones, something that's hot new topic is going to be shared like wildfire. Journals, publishers, specialties with a presence in social media and articles on social media are more likely to be shared there. Perhaps another reason to consider adopting social media use. Reach may be affected by lack of social media access or computer access, such as in developing countries. And finally, citations in peer-reviewed journals are not included in the calculation of the Altmetrics score. So I think at best, at this time anyway, Altmetrics is probably best viewed as something that's complementary to journal-based metrics rather than a substitute for them. However, I do want to mention that there may be a predictive relationship between Altmetrics and traditional citation-based scholarship metrics. So traditionally, journal citations are excluded from the Altmetrics score, but there's growing evidence that there's a correlation between the dissemination of an article as measured by Altmetrics and the number of subsequent citations in traditional peer-reviewed journals. So I think this is really interesting. How are we doing on time? I'm going to wrap up soon. So I'm not going to go into these studies, but suffice it to say that several studies have examined this relationship between Altmetrics and traditional citations, and most have found positive correlation, such as an increase in Altmetrics variables or scores predicted a greater number of citations. There have been studies that haven't shown this correlation. These studies generally, though, tend to look at a more limited set of Altmetrics, like Facebook likes. Now, it's not surprising that Facebook likes aren't necessarily correlated with scholarly citations later on. But regardless of whether there's a correlation or not, I hope that I persuaded you at the very least that it's a complementary way of providing evidence of excellence in a variety of arenas, including scientific discovery, healthcare delivery, medical education, and patient engagement and outreach. I don't know if I'll do all these summary slides. I think it's just repeating what we've already heard. But I do want to say one thing, that you may be focusing still on some of the limitations of Altmetrics, like the gaming. That's what I hear most frequently. There's obviously also concerns about quality. Does dissemination relate to quality? Does citations relate to quality? It's an issue. And also the idea that some may be drawn perhaps like myself, to write tweetable papers. And for you skeptics, I'm going to end on this, which is an email from a journal asking me to peer review my own paper. So I submitted my paper, and then I got this very nice email asking me to review it, which I declined. And that's just a reminder that all systems, even the peer review system, has limitations. Thanks.
That's really another world.
Well,
A little overwhelming.
I was surprised how much I learned about the traditional metrics that I didn't know, like the HIndex seems so mysterious. The journal impact factor, I didn't realize this thing about citable and non-citable. I think a lot of journal editorial board members, from my experience, don't understand that either. They're really important. Go ahead.
One question, it's somewhat related, but I just kind of want your thoughts on this kind of movement and encouraging people to publish in open journal sources.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I wish somebody would give me the funds to pay the fees. I mean, I'm a big proponent of open access. I wish that all articles could be open access. As the editor of the journal for which I work, I have encouraged them to, for at least a month at a time, make an entire journal open access. And what we found in doing that is our number of downloads, paid and unpaid, so either the free downloads during the open access period or the downloads that were paid after the open access period, skyrocketed. Our impact factor went up sort of a half of 0.5. I think it's really important. Obviously, there's some limitations to that, but I think at least temporarily making all articles open access and publicizing that they're open access for that period is important. And I think it will greatly, I'm hoping it greatly increases our citations and greatly increase our downloads. So, but it's the funds. I would publish everything open access if I could, but usually it's $1,000 or so.
And there are some limitations with the open access journals where every day there are like tens of
quality control
right,
problems.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there are some great open access journals, and then there's some, questionable ones that just want to take your money, right? Like the for-profit schools, University.
So are the Altmetrics measures now accepted in university settings? Or?
Yeah, so there was something that just came out about a month ago from Mayo, specifically saying that they were now acknowledging them and counting them towards promotion. So I think Mayo's the only place that's formally announced that. But I know, because I'm on the promotions committee at Hopkins, associate committee, and I'm the chair of the full committee, that they're very interested.
Well, the driver of a black Ford Explorer, Delaware registration, X12557, parked in front of the East House. Please return to your vehicle and you can move.
But they're really encouraging people, because they're trying, I think a lot of the research universities are having challenges retaining clinical faculty, and obviously clinicians drive a lot of the hospitals there, so at the research university. So at our university, we only have a single promotion track. So we have different paths, but everybody needs to be recognized as an internationally to be a full professor, regardless of what your field is. It's hard to be recognized internationally as a medical educator. It really is, and it's hard to be recognized internationally as a clinician compared to a basic scientist who can write a couple of amazing papers and get recognition. So because of that, they're really looking at other ways of measuring recognition. You hope that recognition is also linked to impact, but they're primarily really the core word in our promotions guidelines is recognition.
Do you have other questions? So when would it, I mean, when does it start? Should we go back to all our papers and look at the Altmetrics, or is there only the new papers, or what?
Well, it's probably better to go back in time, you know, and then when you get to a point where you're not seeing any Altmetric scores, stop. Because it is fairly recently that most of these journals have been adopting it. I think academic medicine just started adopting it within the last couple of, I know they were adopting it in 2013. I think that might have been the first year. I think JAMA was a little later. As I recall, I can't remember another one of the big mainstream medicine journals, whether it's New England Journal or Annals. One of them uses a different scoring method, but we'll see. You'll see by just going back. But I think it's definitely worth taking a look, because if you can say that this is one of the top shared articles from this journal, or on, you know, of any journal for articles of this vintage, I think that's saying something.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.